Did you know that the Vikings influenced some of the things you do today? Yep, even though their last ship sailed almost 1,000 years ago, the Vikings played a big part in shaping the world we live in today. You might think, aside from their raids and travels across Europe and beyond, what did the Vikings ever do for us? Well, get ready for a real discovery as we tell you all you need to know. The Viking Age, which occurred from the early 8th to the early 11th century, was a significant period in European history for the regions and countries of the world. Yes, they were warriors, and that's why people associated them with only fighting, but they did more. The Vikings influenced society's communication, transport, physical activities, and even personal hygiene. Thus, their contribution will help influence many aspects of today's world, despite their appearance as rugged individuals. One of the Vikings' most lasting gifts is the creation of the modern Scandinavian countries we know today: Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Before the so-called Viking Age, Scandinavia was populated by many small and fairly isolated societies with their own lifestyles. There wasn't much unity, but over time, these scattered coastal communities came together to form strong, unified kingdoms, and this transformation is one of the Vikings' most impressive achievements. It all started with small raids organized by local communities. These raids brought back treasure, goods, and people, which led to a need for better political and social organization. As these groups worked together, leaders began to rise, bringing even more wealth and resources from their raids and trade adventures. Small coastal towns like Hedeby in Denmark and Birka in Sweden quickly grew into major centers of trade. They became bustling international hubs with people from many cultures, backgrounds, and languages. These towns thrived, and the Vikings soon created powerful kingdoms and vibrant, diverse communities. In the 10th century, Christianity began to spread across Scandinavia as many powerful leaders decided to convert. Once they became Christian, these rulers sought approval and support from the Catholic Church. Many of these leaders fought long and bloody battles to gain control over large areas of land. Probably the best known was Knut the Great, who formed the North Sea Empire and ruled England, Denmark, Norway, and parts of Sweden. However, at the end of the period referred to as the Viking Age, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were three distinct countries. Would this have happened without the Vikings? It's hard to say for sure, but the Vikings played a big part in speeding up the process. Their raids and trading brought in wealth, resources, and people, which helped these areas grow stronger and more organized. Without the Vikings, there likely wouldn't be a Denmark, Norway, or Sweden as we know them today. It's that simple. Speaking of simple, they also influenced some of the simple things we have for keeping ourselves neat and smart, like combs and razors. Although everyone thinks they were just messy and wild, Vikings were cleaner than most Europeans at the time. They would take baths at least once a week, and if they could, they loved to relax in hot springs. The most frequently used artifacts buried with the Viking dead are a comb, typically crafted from the antlers of a deer or other prey animals. Although combs were used in various cultures, the Vikings may be credited with developing the kind of comb that we employ today. The Vikings didn't stop at combs either. Scientists have recovered such hygiene tools as tweezers, razors, and ear spoons that belonged to Bryony and her husband. Hence, Vikings did pay attention to their appearance probably as much as to how they fought. And it wasn't all about fighting, because they did inspire the strong passion for sailing you find among the Scandinavians. Today, Norway's population is around 5.5 million, and over 1 million of them own recreational boats. In fact, about 20% of the Norwegian population not only likes to sail, but they also like to sail their own sailboat. Boating is essentially a famous recreational activity for many individuals in the Scandinavian region, including the Norwegian monarch Harald V. But where did that depth of passion for sailing originate? I bet you guessed it, it was the Vikings. The Vikings lived in regions characterized by lakes, rivers, seas, and oceans, so water was the most convenient mode of transportation. Indeed, water travel was the fastest method for several centuries, even until trains became apparent in Scandinavia during the mid-1800s. Without a desire for adventure and cultural exchange, whether through trade or violence, Scandinavians, especially the Norwegians, may not have become as passionate about sailing as they are. They also influenced one of the sports we now have, skiing. While the oldest skis were found in Russia and the first mention of skiing came from China, the Vikings started the Western skiing tradition. In fact, the word ski comes from the Old Norse skjo. The Vikings weren't just leisure skiers, they also transported themselves through skiing, since they originated from a snowy region. Even the two Viking deities, Skadi and Ullr, were depicted as skiing or using specially designed footwear, the skis or snowshoes respectively, that were the essence of the Viking civilization. Well, when you're getting your skis on today, then you can credit the Vikings for popularizing skiing in the West. They didn't stop there, they also affected how we speak and the words we know today. The Vikings really revolutionized the language of the people, the culture, and the politics of England. This is most easily seen in the effect that they have had on the English tongue. Due to men of the Old Norse tongue settling in the British Isles as Vikings, you can still see this Viking legacy in many everyday English words, grammar, and place names. Common words like sky, egg, window, and even they, their, and them come from Old Norse. Old Norse shaped some parts of English grammar, like the use of personal pronouns. Many towns in northern England, like Grimsby or Scunthorpe, have names that come from Viking origins. Any place ending in B or Thorpe is likely influenced by the Vikings. So next time you say sky or pass through a town with a Viking name, you can use a bit of your Viking history. Other than language, they also significantly impacted lawmaking as we know it today. While lawmaking has been a thing of age, the Vikings had a peculiar impact in one particular region. The Vikings, who settled in Iceland around AD 874, did something remarkable. They created the Althing in AD 930. One of the world's oldest parliaments. This shows that Viking societies weren't just about raiding and conquering, but also about building organized communities with rules and government. The Vikings had a system of law that included ethical codes and rules about ownership. These laws weren't written down, but discussed and decided at gatherings called the Thing, where people came together to solve problems and make decisions. So while Vikings were fierce warriors, they were also leaders in law and governance. At these Viking gatherings, people accused of crimes were judged by a group of their peers. If found guilty, they could be fined, partly banned, or completely outlawed. The Althing in Iceland is still running today, making it the longest running parliament ever. These gatherings influenced the names of local places like Tingwall in Shetland, which was the center of local government until the 1500s. So if Vikings weren't just warriors, they were also big on law and justice, but none of these impacts compare to the next one. What is it? The greatest gift the Vikings gave us was the Norse sagas, a collection of stories, poems, and histories mostly written down in Icelandic during the Viking Age. The sagas cover a lot of topics. Some talk about family fights and dramas, while others talk about the early Viking rulers. Besides the sagas, the Vikings also left many Norse myths and stories about their gods. Their religion, which came from Germanic paganism, mostly disappeared by the end of the 11th century, but their myths and legends have lived on, like the adventures of Thor, Sigurd and his dragon, Idun and her golden apples, and the Great War of the Gods. These stories have fascinated people for hundreds of years. Many authors such as C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and Hollywood filmmakers are indebted to the Vikings for laying down themes for their work. The Viking tales are valued elements of the national tradition that are studied in present day. The Vikings also left their mark in the European region, but it's very important to point out that the Vikings were not only warriors, they were fantastic merchants as well. They established large trade routes that covered all of Europe. They interlinked such regions as Northern Europe, the Mediterranean, Asia, and the Middle East in trade relations. This made it possible for them to trade anything, including spices, silks, weapons, and furs, and also share ideas and cultures from different corners of the world. Viking traders and settlers founded many of the first urban centers in Northern Europe. Cities like Dublin in Ireland, York in England, and Kiev in the Ukraine all began thanks to the Vikings. Their way of government also had a big impact. Viking settlements influenced how political systems were built in many parts of Europe. In fact, their ideas of leadership and governance propelled the feudal systems and even the formative stages of some of today's nation-states. Despite the fact that it has been more than 1,000 years since the Vikings' attacks, the Vikings helped to make the world we inhabit today what it is. In so many aspects, the Vikings have had their fingerprints all over the modern world, and their impacts are still felt.